Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Varadari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Varadari. Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Varadari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Varadari. Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Shri Shri Radha Madhava ki, Shri Shri Radha Radhanath ki. Jaya Om Vishnu Pada Paramahamsa Parivrakacharya Astotara Shata Shri Shri Mad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki, BBT founder Srila Prabhupada ki, ISKCON Samstapakacharya Srila Prabhupada ki, Mantra Upasaka Srila Prabhupada ki, Savior of the whole world Srila Prabhupada ki, Preeminent Shiksha Guru Srila Prabhupada ki. Jai Om Vishnu Pada Paramahamsa Parivrakacharya Stotara Shata Shri Shri Mad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada ki, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki, Pramsa Kaur Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shivasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki, Shri Shri Gopa Gopinath Shamakun Radhakun Giri Govardhan ki, Shri Vrindavan Dham ki, Mayapur Dham ki, Ganga Maya ki, Yamuna Maya ki, Tulsi Maharani ki, Sama Veta Bhakta Vrinda ki, Gaura Premanande, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. We can chant Prabhupada's prana mantra together. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Today we are reading from Srila Prabhupada's Lilamrta, chapter entitled Jet Age Parivrakacharya. So we'll continue with this chapter. Prabhupada also agreed to speak at Wayside Chapel, a center in downtown Sydney, ministering to drug addicts and prostitutes. A Wayside sponsor met Prabhupada at the temple and accompanied him to the chapel. The sponsor, a long-haired young man in hippie dress, boasted of how Wayside Chapel helped drug addicts. Prabhupada, however, took it that he was saying the chapel supplied drugs to the addicts. At Wayside Chapel, a skeptic in the audience challenged Prabhupada. Prabhupada had explained that the chanting of the holy names of God was the only way to actually help people. But the cynic challenged, what good actually is the chanting of Hare Krishna? It saves you from death, Prabhupada answered, possibly. May 12, 1971. In his quarters in Sydney, Prabhupada wrote the preface to the upcoming edition of Bhagavad Gita as it is. The Macmillan Company had now agreed to print the unabridged manuscript. The contract was signed, the book was being readied for printing, only the preface remained to be written. Prabhupada wrote in his preface that although he was known for starting the Krishna consciousness movement in America, actually the original father of this movement is Lord Krishna himself. Giving all credit for his own achievements to his spiritual master, Prabhupada said that the only qualification he himself had was that he had tried to present Bhagavad Gita as it is without adulteration. Instead of satisfying his own personal material senses, he, a person, has to satisfy the senses of the Lord. That is the highest perfection of life. The Lord wants this, and he demands it. One has to understand this central point of Bhagavad Gita. Our Krishna consciousness movement is teaching the whole world this central point. And because we are not polluting the theme of Bhagavad Gita as it is, anyone seriously interested in deriving benefit by studying the Bhagavad Gita must take help from the Krishna consciousness movement for practical understanding of Bhagavad Gita under the direct guidance of the Lord. We hope, therefore, that people will derive the greatest benefit by studying Bhagavad Gita as it is, as we have presented it here. And if even one man becomes a pure devotee of the Lord, we shall consider our attempt a success. As Prabhupada explained in his preface, he was publishing the full Gita manuscript to establish the Krishna consciousness movement more soundly and progressively. He would do this by presenting transcendental literature like Bhagavad Gita, but he would also have to go, as Lord Chaitanya has said, to every town and village, either personally or through his agents, his disciples. And wherever he went, he would preach Bhagavad Gita to whoever would listen. Tomorrow, Prabhupada would leave Australia for a big Pandal festival in Calcutta, then on to Moscow, Paris, Los Angeles. Lord Krishna states in Bhagavad Gita that no servant is more dear to him than one who teaches Bhagavad Gita to his devotees. And Prabhupada, in all his activities, whether writing a preface, lecturing to the prostitutes and drug addicts, teaching a disciple to cook chapatis without burning them, or planning grand projects yet to come, was always teaching Bhagavad Gita, and therefore was always the dearest servant of Lord Krishna. Prabhupada stood before the deities of Radha Gopinath with folded hands. After less than a week in Sydney, he was leaving. He knew that the devotees here were not up to the standard required for worshipping Radha and Krishna, and he knew he was taking a risk, entrusting their worship to neophyte disciples. Yet as an empowered acharya and as the representative of Lord Chaitanya, he had to implant Krishna consciousness anywhere it might take root. The world was in desperate need. If his disciples followed the process he had given them, chanting, hearing, observing regulative principles, he knew they would quickly become purified. He had given an analogy. Although in material life a man must first become a highly qualified lawyer before sitting on the judge's bench. In Krishna consciousness, a sincere devotee is first allowed to sit on the bench to become a brahmana, and later, by the mercy of the holy name and the spiritual master, he becomes qualified. The devotees in Sydney, however, were particularly immature, and Prabhupada made an extraordinary request of Radha Gopinath. Now I am leaving you in the hands of malechas. I cannot take the responsibility. You please guide these boys and girls and give them the intelligence to worship you very nicely. Calcutta, May 13th, 1971. Prabhupada arrived just in time for the 10-day Calcutta Pandal festival. On his orders, Giriraj and Tamal Krishna had come to organize the festival just as they had the one in Bombay. Prabhupada had written to Jaipataka Swami, president of ISKCON Calcutta. In the Sankirtan festival Pandal, if a very big kitchen arrangement can be made, then we shall distribute prasadam daily. Try to make this arrangement. Puris, halava, khichdi, whatever can be arranged, as much as possible. Tamal Krishna and Giriraj have all the ideas. Attendance surpassed that of the Bombay Pandal, with 20 to 30,000 people attending daily, including ministers of parliament and other distinguished speakers. It was one of the biggest religious functions Calcutta had ever seen. The whole city became aware of the strength of the Hare Krishna movement. In the early afternoon, devotees would begin selling Prabhupada's books from a booth, performing kirtana on stage and distributing prasadam to the masses. Around 6:30, the evening program would begin with a long, intense kirtan, which would increase in its fervor as Prabhupada arrived for the evening arti before the deities of Radha and Krishna. Prabhupada would lecture sometimes in Bengali and sometimes in English. Afterward, the devotees would show slides of the Krishna consciousness movement around the world, and Prabhupada would answer questions from the audience. After the program, people would push forward to receive a morsel of prasadam that had been offered to the deity. Naxalite terrorists threatened Prabhupada's life. These young communist terrorists, who had been active in Calcutta during Prabhupada's visit of 1970, had never disturbed him until now. Their tactic was to approach prominent businessmen in their homes or on the street and coerce them into cooperation with Naxalite political objectives. If a businessman refused, the Naxalites would burn his home or place business or even assassinate him. The Naxalites, who were eager for all of Bengal to turn from their religious traditions and embrace communism, saw Prabhupada rekindling the religious spirit in Calcutta. Prabhupada's tremendous crowd-gathering pandal, they concluded, was undermining the principles of communism. Fly or die, read the note Prabhupada received. He informed the police, who regretted their inability to help. The whole of Calcutta, they said, was in terror of the Naxalites. Prabhupada, however, refused to be intimidated. He would not fly. Even if they were to attack him, he said, what better way for a Vaishnava to leave his body than while preaching the glories of the Lord? The next night, as Prabhupada came before the crowd to speak, he noticed a group of rowdy young men, Naxalites, near the stage. They were protesting the preferential seating of certain dignitaries on stage. When one young radical shouted that the radicals themselves wanted to dance on stage, the devotees invited them to join in kirtan. The Naxalites backed down, but continued shouting and disrupting the meeting. They began banging the seats of the wooden folding chairs, calling out Naxalite slogans, and threatening to burn the place down. Others in the audience began talking nervously among themselves, increasing the commotion. In a vain attempt to bring order, some of the devotees threatened the dissenters. Pushing and scuffling broke out in the audience. Chintamani prakara sadmasu, kalpa vriksha rakshavriteshu, surabir abhipalayantam. Prabhupada's voice rang over the powerful loudspeakers system. Appearing uninterested in the crowd, depending only on Krishna, he began singing prayers from Brahma Samhita, and within minutes everyone quieted. Those who wanted to leave left, and those who wanted to stay sat down. The crowd subdued. Prabhupada lectured. Several more fly-or-die notes came, and the Naxalites returned the next night, threatening again to burn the pandal. Call them, Prabhupada said. I will meet with them. Shri Radharanath ki, Srila Prabhupada ki. The devotees thought it unsafe, but Prabhupada insisted. In a small room behind the pandal, Prabhupada spoke to the hostile youth. They were angry and disrespectful at first, but as Prabhupada explained to them the Vedic concept of communism, with Krishna at the center, he caught their interest. They agreed to allow Prabhupada's meetings to continue without further disruptions. Achyutananda Swami. The last night of the 10-day Pandal program was a grand finale, with over 40,000 people attending. I had just stepped out to get sugarcane juice. The Pandal was completely packed when I left, but when I got outside, I saw rivers of people flowing through the 4 main gates into the Pandal tent. I thought this must be Krishna's mystic power, because the tent was already packed, and still thousands of people were entering it. I thought that Krishna must be unlimitedly expanding the dimensions of space. The climax of the evening was a big procession beginning at the Pandal and going up Park Street to the ISKCON temple on Albert Road. The deities of Radha Govinda rode on a palanquin to the temple, where they were placed on the altar. After an arti in the temple, the remaining crowd dispersed. Achyutananda Swami was standing next to Prabhupada the next night in the Calcutta temple. Prabhupada, he said, someone put Krishna's flute backward. Prabhupada looked. It was backward. Krishna is all-powerful, he said, turning to Achyutananda Swami. He can play from the back end also. Srila Prabhupada was striving for a plot of land in Mayapur. Having abandoned the idea that his god brothers in Mayapur might help, he had been working through Bengali friends in negotiating with Muslim farmers in Mayapur. On returning from Australia, Prabhupada had sent Tamal Krishna to Mayapur with orders not to come back until he had purchased land. Tamal Krishna's mission was successful, and after 6 days he returned to Prabhupada in Calcutta, having purchased 9 brigas, 3 acres in Mayapur. Conceiving the value of Mayapur was different for devotees. However, one devotee journeyed from Calcutta to see the new ISKCON property, and on returning asked Prabhupada, "What are we going to do there? It's just a big empty field, nothing there, nothing is there." "Because there are no factories and cars," Prabhupada replied. "Therefore you think there is nothing to do. But we are going to chant Hare Krishna in Mayapur. We will build a big temple there, and all the devotees in the world can go out and chant Hare Krishna in the place of Lord Chaitanya's birth." On May 28, Prabhupada wrote, "You'll be glad to learn that we have purchased about 5 acres of land in Mayapur, the birth site of Lord Chaitanya, and we have proposed to hold a nice festival there from Janmashtami Day for 2 weeks, and that at that time the foundation stone will be set down. I wished that all our leading disciples come to India at that time. There are 50 branches, so at least one from each branch should attend the function." June 1971. For months, Prabhupada had been planning to visit Moscow. Aside from his desire to preach to the Russian people, he had a specific meeting in mind with a Russian Indology professor, G.G. Kovatsky. Professor Kotovsky headed the Department of Indian and South Asian Studies at Moscow's USSR Academy of Sciences, and Prabhupada had been corresponding with him for a year. Krishna Das in West Germany, with the help of a Dr. Bernhard of the Indology, Dr. Bernhard of the University of Hamburg, had obtained the names of other Russian scholars of Indology. A letter to Krishna Das in December of 1970 had revealed Prabhupada's plan for preaching in Russia. "I am very encouraged to see your enthusiasm for preaching this message to the Russian people, and your idea to send letters with the help of Dr. Bernhardt is very good. He is a big scholar, and he also appreciates our movement. So if you arrange a tour of Russia to me, I am prepared to accept. Let us see what Krishna desires. If we can go to Russia with our World Sankirtan Party, I am certain that it will be very much appreciated, and people will see the real peace movement is chanting process, chanting the holy names Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So try it." Srila Prabhupada had coached Krishna Das on how to best cultivate Russian Indologists. You can ask them questions like, what is the ultimate goal of life? What is your ideal ultimate goal of life? What is the difference between animal and human life? Why is religion accepted by all kinds of civilized societies? What is your conception of the original creation? In this way, questions may be put to find out what is their standing. We do not grudge an atheist provided he has some philosophical standing. In this way, try to elicit some answers from the professors. If you can finally establish one Moscow center, it will be a great credit to you. So far, studying Russian language is not necessary. But if you do not do so, it is all right. I want very much a center in Russia. So for the time being, I shall desire that Moscow center. In March 1971, Professor G.G. Kotovsky had replied to Krishna Das's letter. I thank you for your information about Swami Bhaktivedanta's lecturing tour. If you would come to Moscow, the Soviet scholars doing research in ancient Indian culture would be very happy to meet him in the Institute of Oriental Studies, USSR, Academy of Sciences. I would be thankful to you for your information on the dates of Swami Bhaktivedanta's arrival and stay in the USSR. Srila Prabhupada had personally replied to Professor Kotovsky. It was understood that you and your university are interested in hearing about Krishna culture and philosophy. This ancient Krishna culture and philosophy is the oldest in the world or in the universe. At least from a historical point of view, it is not less than 5,000 years old. Perhaps you know that I have started this cultural movement since 1966, and it is already spreading all over the world. Krishna culture is so popular in India that even the government attracts many foreigners. By Air India, timetable to visit Vrindavan, the land of Krishna culture. Enclosed, please find one page from the latest Air India timetable, April 1971, wherein the Krishna culture is depicted for general attraction. My life is dedicated to spreading Krishna culture all over the world. I think if you give me a chance to speak about the great Krishna culture and philosophy in your country, you will very much appreciate this simple program with great profit. This culture is so well planned that it would be acceptable by any thoughtful man throughout the whole world. Having preached a year in the Eastern Hemisphere, Prabhupada was eager to return to the West, and he planned to fly to Moscow and on to Europe. For Prabhupada and his traveling companions, Shyamasundar and Avarinda, getting tourist visas for Russia was simple. They would take a 5-day government-controlled tour, with every activity planned by the Soviet Tourist Bureau and everything paid for in advance. Captain Lal, the pilot of the flight to Moscow, considered Prabhupada an important passenger and came back to visit him during the flight. He spoke of Prabhupada's movement, his chances of lecturing in Moscow, and of Bombay, where Prabhupada was trying to purchase land. Captain Lal invited Prabhupada to the cockpit, and Prabhupada came and sat behind the captain, asking technical questions about equipment, and the flight. Prabhupada and Captain Lal agreed to meet again in Moscow. Prabhupada, his secretary, and his servant cleared Soviet customs and immigration quickly and smoothly, and the government tourist guide escorted them by limousine to the Hotel National. The hotel near Red Square, Lenin's tomb, and the Kremlin was expensive but plain. Prabhupada found his room dingy and cramped, with barely space for a bed and 2 chairs. The room for Shyamasundar and Avarinda was far away, and Prabhupada decided that Aravinda should share the room with him, instead crowding Prabhupada's room all the more. Aravinda told the hotel manager that they would not eat the hotel fare, but would have to cook their own meals. The manager refused at first, but finally allowed them to use the maid's kitchen. That problem solved. The next was getting food. Prabhupada sent Shyamasundar out. Across the street, Shyamasundar found a milk and yogurt store, but he returned to Prabhupada's room without any fruit, vegetables, or rice. Prabhupada sent him out again, and this time Shyamasundar was gone practically all day, returning with only a couple of cabbages. Prabhupada sent him out the next day for rice. When Shyamasundar returned with rice after several hours, Prabhupada saw that it was a poor North Korean variety, very hard. Prabhupada asked for fruit, but Shyamasundar had to hike for miles through the city to find anything fresh. A few red cherries. Wherever Shyamasundar went, he would have to stand in long queues to purchase anything. Usually, however, someone in the queue would notice that he was a tourist and bring him to the front of the line. Everything Shyamasundar purchased was with coupons. Prabhupada remained peaceful and regulated, keeping to his daily schedule. He would rise early and translate, and in the cool of early morning, he would go out for a walk through the all but deserted streets. Prabhupada, wearing a saffron chadar, strode quickly, Shyamasundar sometimes running ahead to photograph him. As they would pass Lenin's tomb, a queue would already be forming. "Just see," Prabhupada commented one morning. "That is their God. The people don't understand the difference between the body and the spirit. They accept the body as the real person." Prabhupada appreciated the sparseness of the traffic, some trolleys and bicycles, but mostly pedestrians. As he walked among the old ornate buildings, he saw elderly women hosing the wide streets. "A good practice," he said. The Russian people appear to live structured, regulated lives, much more so than the Americans. These simple, austere people, unspoiled by the rampant hedonism so common in America, were fertile for Krishna consciousness, but devoid of spiritual sustenance. Yet they appeared morose. Prabhupada had Shyamasundar arrange a meeting with Professor Kotovsky and invite Captain Lal to come along. The Tourist Bureau provided a car and guide, and Prabhupada and his party rode outside the city to Professor Kotovsky's office in an old white brick building at the Academy's Sciences. When Prabhupada arrived, the middle-aged Russian professor, dressed in a grey suit, got up from his cluttered desk and welcomed Prabhupada into his small office. Professor Kotovsky appeared a bit hesitant, however more cautious than in his letters. When Shyamasundar mentioned Prabhupada's eagerness to lecture before interested scholars at the Academy, Professor Kotovsky flatly refused. It would never be allowed. Prabhupada was disappointed. The next moment, however, Prabhupada seemed unaffected, and he began speaking in his humble, genteel manner, sitting in a straight-back office chair beside Professor Kotovsky, who was at his desk. Shyamasundar turned on the tape recorder, which the professor eyed cautiously but didn't object to. Prabhupada, the other day I was reading in the paper Moscow News. There was a communist congress, and the president declared that we are ready to get others' experiences to improve. So I think the Vedic concept of socialism or communism will much improve the idea of communism. Professor Kotovsky listened intently and politely as his foreign visitor explained how the Grihastha in Vedic culture provides for everyone living in the house, even for the lizards, and how, before taking his meal, he calls in the road to invite any hungry person to come out and eat. In this way, Prabhupada explained, there are so many good concepts about socialist idea of communism. So I thought that these ideas might have been distributed to some of your thoughtful men. Therefore, I was anxious to speak. Professor Kotovsky's academic interest was piqued. You know, it is interesting, he said, his articulate English heavily accented. As it is here in our country, there is now great interest in the history of old thought. He described the accomplishments of his colleagues and himself, particularly a bootleg he had recently prepared highlighting Soviet studies in Indology. He said he would like to give a copy to Prabhupada. Professor Kotovsky, you will be interested to discover that we published not all but some Puranas and some parts of the Ramayana, 8 volumes in Russian of the Mahabharata, and also a second edition of the Mahabharata, translated by different people in full and published. Manusmriti is also translated in full and published with Sanskrit commentaries. And such was the great interest of that all of these publications were sold in a week. They are now completely out of stock. It is impossible to get them in the book market after a month. Such a great interest among reading people here in Moscow and the USSR towards ancient Vedic culture. Prabhupada, among these Puranas, the Srimad Bhagavatam is called the Mahapurana, and he told of his own translation of Srimad Bhagavatam, the ripened fruit of the Vedic desire tree. He would show some volumes to the professor if he was interested. Professor Kotovsky said The Moscow and Leningrad libraries had nearly all the major texts of Indian culture in Sanskrit. These libraries house not only ancient texts but more recent literature as well, comprising an up-to-date study of Hinduism. Hinduism, Prabhupada interrupted, is a very complex topic, and they both laughed. Professor Kotovsky acknowledged that Hinduism was more than a religion. It was a way of life. But Prabhupada explained that the name Hindu was actually a misnomer. The real term to explain Vedic culture was Varna Ashrama. Briefly, Prabhupada described the four orders: Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. Professor Kotovsky, you have told that in any society there are four divisions, but it is not so easy to distinguish. For instance, one can group together different social classes and professional groups into four divisions in any society. There is no difficulty. The only difficulty is, for instance, in socialist society, in our country and other socialist societies, how can you distinguish productive group and workers? Prabhupada welcomed the professor's question. Although grounded in Soviet socialist vested interests, Prabhupada considered the professor not so much an academician as a pawn of the Soviet university system, much as a political poet tries to understand its adversary. The professor was inquiring into Indian culture so that his government might penetrate it with their own ideology. Behind Professor Kotovsky's apparent interest in Vedic culture, Prabhupada would see the view of the Socialist Party, a view diametrically opposed to Vedic philosophy. Nevertheless, Prabhupada tactfully continued to present Krishna consciousness in accord with parampara, and he tried to convince Professor Kotovsky through scripture and logic. Quoting Bhagavad Gita, a shastra with which the professor was familiar in his own way, Prabhupada described Lord Krishna as the creator of the four divisions of society. Professor Kotovsky immediately countered with the theory of the Soviet scholars that the Varna Ashrama divisions were a recent addition to Vedic culture. He also again registered his opinion that the divisions of Varna Ashrama had no meaning within socialism. Professor Kotovsky, there is a great distinction between socialist society and all societies preceding socialism, because in modern Western society you can group all social and professional classes in the particular class divisions: Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or factory owners, and Shudras, or menial workers. But here we have no Vaishyas, because we have administrative staff in factories, managerial staff. You can call them Kshatriyas and then Shudras. The workers themselves, but not in this intermediate class. Prabhupada, it is stated, Kalo Shudra Sambhava. In this age, practically all men are Shudras. That is stated. But if they are simply Shudras, then the social order will be disturbed. In spite of your state of Shudras, the Brahmanas are there. That is necessary. So if you do not divide the social order in such a way, then it will be chaos. That is the scientific estimation of the Vedas. You may belong to the Shudra class, but to maintain the social order, you must train some of the Shudras to become Brahmanas. It cannot depend on the Shudras. Prabhupada gave his standard analogy, comparing the social body to the human body. All the parts are necessary, not only the legs, but the belly, the arms, and the head. Otherwise, he said, it will not work properly. As long as this is going on, there will be some disturbance. Modern society's missing point, Prabhupada said, was an understanding of the purpose of human life. They do not know what is the next life. He said, there is no department of knowledge or scientific department to study what is there after finishing this body. Professor Kotovsky objected, politely, completely. Swamiji, he said, when the body dies, the owner also dies. Prabhupada marked his reply. The scholar professor, head of the Department of Indian Studies in the Soviet Academy, was caught in a classic moment of ignorance. His concept of who he was no more advanced than an animal's. No, Prabhupada quickly replied. The fact you must know. Why is there no department of knowledge in the university to study this fact scientifically? That is my proposition. That department is lacking. It may be as you say, it may be as I say, but there must be a department of knowledge. Now recently, a cardiologist, a doctor in Montreal and Toronto, has accepted that there is a soul. I had some correspondence with him. He strongly believes that there is a soul. Prabhupada continued to build his argument. We accept knowledge from authority. The professor accounted that everything had to be accepted on the basis of empirical evidence. But then, in mid-sentence, he stopped arguing and inquired, have you many branches of your society in the world? Prabhupada began speaking about ISKCON, and with its 65 branches all over the world, and how he was going next to Paris, where his disciples had recently acquired a new center, and of how American boys and girls especially were joining his movement. He told of the four prohibitive rules: no meat eating, no illicit sex, no intoxication, and no gambling, and of the books he had published. As Prabhupada described the workings of his movement, Professor Kotovsky nodded approvingly. When Prabhupada returned to comparing Krishna consciousness to communism, he concluded that the two philosophies were in agreement, and both stressed surrender to an authority. The devotee surrenders to Krishna, the communist to Lenin. Prabhupada, our life is by surrender, is it not? Do you disagree with this point? Kotovsky, to some extent you surrender. Prabhupada, yes, to the full extent. Kotovsky, you have to surrender to society, for instance, the whole people. Prabhupada, yes, to the whole people, or to the state, or king, or government, or whatever you say, the surrender must be there. It may be different. Kotovsky, the only difficulty is we cannot surrender to government or to a king. The principal difference is of surrendering to a king, who is a single person, or to the whole society. Prabhupada, no, that is a change of color only, but the surrender is there. The principle of surrender is there, whether you surrender to monarchy, democracy, aristocracy, or dictatorship, you have to surrender. That is a fact. Without surrender, there is no life. It is not possible. So we are educating persons to surrender to the Supreme, wherein you get all protection, just like Krishna says, Sarva Dharman Parityajya, to surrender. So surrender is there. No one can say, no, I am not surrendered to anyone. The difference is where he surrenders. And the ultimate surrendering object is Krishna. Therefore in Bhagavad Gita it is said, Bahunam Janmanam Ante Jnanavan Mam Prapadyante. After surrendering to so many things, birth after birth, when one is factually wise, he surrenders unto me. Professor Kotovsky agreed, but surrender had to be accompanied by revolution, he said. The French Revolution, for example, was a revolt against one kind of surrender, and yet the revolution itself was another surrender to the people. So it is not enough to come full stop. The professor argued, surrender is to be accompanied with revolt against surrender to other people. Prabhupada, yes, surrender will be full stop when it is surrender to Krishna. That is full stop. No more surrender. The other surrender you have to change by revolution. But when you come to Krishna, then it is sufficient. You are satisfied. Just like I give you one example. A child is crying and the people change laps. Oh, it has not stopped. But as soon as the baby comes to the lap of its mother, Kotovsky, it stops. Prabhupada, yes, full satisfaction. So this surrender, the changes will go on in different categories. The sum total of these surrenders is the surrender to Maya, material illusion. But the final surrender is to Krishna, and then you will be happy. I'll stop over here. Hare Krishna.